Greetings. My name is Cheryl Johnson, and I am here celebrating Juneteenth 2020 with Rolling Out. Today, we will be interviewing Mr. Stephen Williams, who is with the National Coalition of Juneteenth, but we also will be reaching out to individuals and leadership across the country in major cities who will be bringing Juneteenth activities and celebrations to their cities in Atlanta, Houston, LA, and wherever we gather together. This celebration is about spirit, it is about freedom, it is about coalition building, and we are part of telling the story of Juneteenth 2022. Today, I have with me Mr. Stephen Williams, who has worked diligently, and you'll have to tell us for how long, in helping to build the momentum that people became invested in and ended up being able to push the issue of the Juneteenth celebration and the Juneteenth holiday into the forefront. And through that work and coalition building, we ended up with what we have now, the Juneteenth celebration and the national holiday. Mr. Williams, good morning. How are you today?
Good morning, Cheryl. I'm doing well. Thanks for asking.
Great, great. Give us your full title and the name of your organization. And then would you please tell me how long you've been involved with the Juneteenth efforts?
Well, my name is Stephen Williams. I'm the president of the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation. That's a complicated question to answer. But before me, there was a guy by the name of Reverend Ronald B. Myers, Senior MD, the father of the modern Juneteenth movement, Doc Myers. He was a reverend, he was a medical doctor, and in between that, he was a lot of things. But Juneteenth was one of his passions, and making a federal holiday was a novel concept for me to be involved in. Myself, I grew up with Juneteenth. My family's from Oklahoma. Doc's family's from Oklahoma. We grew up with the Juneteenth mentality, Juneteenth thing. I'm a musician. Doc's a musician. We were a lot of parallels. So I met Doc Myers back in 2002 at the National Press Club, and I had access to resources on Capitol Hill that he found were valuable, and he called me a secret man in DC. And I worked with Doc with delivering things back and forth, with the liaison for him, so to say, when he wasn't here. So the thing about it is bringing awareness to the Juneteenth. And Juneteenth is just not about a celebration, right? It's a way of life. And one of the things that we've done is we've educated a lot of the United States government about their relevance to Juneteenth. We educated Oklahoma about the connection between the Oklahoma Juneteenth, the Oklahoma Freedom Day, like, everybody else has their Freedom Day in DC and Florida and Mississippi. Oklahoma has theirs, which is June 14th, and how that connected to Black Wall Street. We connected to that form, right? And so it's a mentality. It's just not a commemoration, a celebration. And that's what Doc and I understood. And but to get it legislated was an effort to bring awareness to Juneteenth. So how did that come about? In 1994, a group of ministers were called, not to Texas, but to New Orleans by Reverend John Mosley at Christian Unity Church to bring greater attention to and greater awareness of Juneteenth. And out of that meeting, the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation sprouted, and Doc Myers was named the chairman of it. In his quest to get Juneteenth there, he got legislation passed in 43 states and the District of Columbia. Wow. So it was we were at a point where we could get the legislation on the floor. That point is not to be taken lightly, right? Because what you said, there was a moratorium on holidays after King Day, right? And because of that moratorium, you had to get it ratified. That means at least 39 states had to agree. So when Doc Meyer started out, here's the states that were there: Texas, with Al Edwards, who was pushed by Reverend Thomas to get it done. Then it was Florida, Dr. Alzo Reddick, who's still alive and he's a member of our organization. He did it, passed in Florida. Then Maxine Horner in Oklahoma, right? That legislation was written by Connie Johnson, who's still with us, right? So that's when Doc came in, right? So he came in after that and he picked up the ball and started in Delaware with a guy by the name of Bernie Wilkins, and then Connecticut with George Mintz, and you just started marching down the road, right? The 39th state to recognize Juneteenth in the Union was Nevada, and that was done by our Secretary and Vice Chair, Deborah Evans, in the state of Nevada, was the 39th state. So then after that, we were able to get K. Bailey Hutchinson to write an amendment, SJR 2045, 2012. And we started pushing for that particular amendment. While Doc was going around the country, he built a coalition of Juneteenth family, Juneteenth people, right? He had state directors, and he built directors in different states and different things. And he was very prolific, big brain, kept it right here. And so we worked. He worked on getting that, and we were calling our state representatives, and we were calling our senators and our other people of importance, and following instructions, and some traction, but not much traction. The techniques were kind of working, but weren't working. And so around 2016, I had some personal stuff happening in my life, right? And Doc was like, "Get out of that, man. Come on over here and let's get this bill going." So when Doc Martins would call you at 2:00 in the morning, "We need to call you a senator and get this."
Oh no! Oh no!
Yeah, oh yeah.
Wow.
He'd be in the.
That's some real work. People, let me put a pin in that for a second. People really don't understand how this coalition came together and the amount of work that it took for people to. It's one thing to do something for a year, but it's another thing to do it for year in, year out. And people change. Somebody might have lost a position along the way. Then you got to cultivate a whole nother crew. And I just have to give you credit for the amount of work and coalition building that everybody who was part of this put in. And so I just want to get to the place where you've made the phone calls, you've talked to the legislators.
So now here comes the real part, right? We've got the bill on the floor, and we get the legislation, and we get it from legislative aid at a senator's office. And these are people that we know. We're dealing with the nitty-gritty with the group, with the legislative aides and the people who do the work in the Senate, right? And they send this thing, and I remember I almost wrecked in the crowd when I get it, because here's what happened. Doc had asked me, go see what was wrong with the bill. And I said, okay, because I never knew what was wrong with the bill. We weren't getting any traction. So I went and knocked on people's doors and sat down with the legislative aides or the chief of staff. And they said, man, the bill's about Texas. Why am I going to vote to make a national holiday for Texas? I'm like, really? So it's about Texas. I said, okay. And that went on and on. I'm going through the Harton building. I'm going through the McPherson building. I'm talking to senators today. I'm knocking on the door. I go back and say, Doc, it's really about Texas. I said, so we got several things we got to do, Doc. First, we got to restructure and organize NJOF, because it's all in your head, okay? We got to put it down on paper, we structure it. Number two, we got to look at this. So once we got a structure, I developed, from what I learned from working in nonprofits, committees, right? Because I learned the most effective places, they might have commissioners, but committees, teams was better. So we developed an education committee, and that education committee went out and started researching Juneteenth. And coming the data, who was there, what ships, how'd they get there, where'd they come from? All that stuff is relevant. So that's how we started putting it together and started educating people there about Juneteenth in the Senate and the government. We would tell them, the troops came from New York, they came from Illinois, they came from Pennsylvania, they
Right.
left out of City Point, Virginia, they refueled in Mobile, Alabama. General Granger, even though he didn't do all the stuff he did, he was a commander. He was from Kentucky, Mitch McConnell. He married a Harper and he's buried there. Okay, I'm in. So that's how we started to bring the whole thing in about the relevance of Juneteenth with people. So then they got to the point where we get legislation. There's several different types of ways we can get there. We get this legislation, it comes in and we look at it, and every piece of legislation have findings, the reason why that you're making this bill. Right. And we look at the findings and I reach them back and I'm like saying, you guys, this ain't even close. This is in the trash can. We can't put, this is not nothing about, we don't care what the slave master said. This is not about them. Juneteenth's about us, okay? It's about us. Right. So we put together a legislative team, including Connie Johnson and Dr. Reddick, and we started writing legislation. And Ron Brown out of Pennsylvania, right? We put together and we worked that night. And Adoni Rotini, we had a legislative team that we were tossing back with the government's best on what we could do, what we couldn't do. We would submit findings to them and they would say, okay, this rule, so-and-so, don't make this rule, this committee, we can't do this, back and forth. We were back and forth trying to get the findings right.
So this is from 2000 what?
So right now, this starts in 2020. 2020, after we start tussling with them back and forth with our legislative team, with the Senate, and finally, after we couldn't get what we wanted, and it was a draw. We were looking at it, and one of the senators' aides said, there's a thing that's called zero findings, and I said, you know what? That's right. That we can do zero findings because everybody here has passed the legislation. Everybody has voted on it yes at once. The states have recognized it already, so we don't have to go through all this on technical point. So that's how we did that. We use the process. That's them using the political process. So we can get the win in, and now we can go back in 5 years, 4 years, and haggle about what goes in the findings. But we've already got the win in. So you understand what I'm saying? So it's already a holiday. Instead of trying to fight over and make them sure that, okay, we all know what it is, and we can come back and amend it in a few years. That's the beauty of using the system. As Frederick Douglass said, I found the Constitution as a tool going to be wielded for emancipation and freedom. So it's the duty of every American to use the political process and the Constitution to make it do what it's supposed to do. And 110 years later, Medgar Evers said the same thing. If you don't like what's going on in the Republican Party, get in there and change it. So, that's what this example is for us. So when they came to us with objections of why they couldn't, we went to overcome those objections. We didn't look at it as a challenge. And along the way, we discovered the history that the true heroes behind Juneteenth were the United States colored troops that were there in mass, okay? That they're in mass to go deal with Maximilian. So we learned the self-agency of it, and that it wasn't read by a white man on a balcony, but posted on the door of the colored church. So we went and did the research. So think about it. They're used to seeing troops, but they see these over 3,000 Black men, USCT, with uniforms on. There's a US on their collar. They got an eagle on their button, bullets in their pockets, and rifles, and they're marching proudly with their heads high through the streets. And other people are running. The other people are running. They're like, this is not a few, right? And all of a sudden, you're stunned, and they just let you know you're free. And we got the oral history. We recorded the oral history from people who said, my grandpa was there. He told me freedom came when the Black men with guns arrived. We've got recorded oral history. We've got BOI, Born on the Island, people that told us. Reedy Chapel does a ceremony honoring all the time when the General Order Number 3 was put on the wall door of the church. So that's the truth about where we're at. So that's, we took that challenge and set it as an example for what to do. So yes, there was a group of people that pushed hard for it, but in the final analysis, it came down to educating people one at a time, picking up the phone and getting them to go.
Wow. So that's a lesson in itself about how we need to engage in the political process, but we have to do it as a coalition, and we have to be smart about it. Because if we can get this passed, and we have to know our research, we have to know the background, we have to have a foundation. Because if we can get this passed, if we can do this together, what else can we do together? And so for me, that in itself is revolutionary. When I see the Juneteenth holiday, I'm looking at revolution for me. I'm looking at, wow, recognition, because even here in Atlanta, I'm based in Atlanta, we used to have a Juneteenth celebration back in the 80s that was actually pretty big. And then it died out. And when I started hearing about Juneteenth again in the mid 2015, 16, people started revving up about it again. I was like, wow, we used to do something in Atlanta, but we haven't done it in Atlanta in a long time. And people say, oh, that's not relevant to us. And I guess I will ask the question right now.
What? Bob Johnson does a huge Juneteenth.
Oh, we do a huge, now, of course we're doing a huge.
Bob been doing Juneteenth for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was.
Bob's one of the best state directors in the foundation ever. So he's always represented for Georgia.
But again, it was
powwows down there and everything. So yeah, you just have to be tuned in. Yeah.
Right. But it was that the people who were doing Juneteenth up until probably about 4 years ago were real grassroots. And then now in Atlanta, it has become, it's across the city. Yeah. Not just Bob, but we have about, maybe 10 different celebrations going on this weekend. And some at some major institutions like the Atlanta History Center, which they had done some little things, but now they do a major Juneteenth every year. So that's just to say that, no, there always been the coalition, the grassroots people celebrating, but there were groups of community members who said, why is that relevant to us? Why should a larger African-American community embrace this Juneteenth celebration? And so with your explanation of that Juneteenth in Texas wasn't just about the citizens of Texas becoming aware of what was going on, but it also was about the colored troops who had come from other parts of the country. It was about people who had fought for freedom all the way to Texas. And so that's all of us. And then it's the people, who left Texas and migrated to other parts. So whether you're in Oklahoma, Los Angeles.
So let me finish it up for you like this. The men who were on the ship that left out of Hopewell, Virginia on May 25th, right? They left out of Hopewell, Virginia, which is Cityport, present-day Hopewell, Virginia, were the same men that captured General Lee at Appomattox. They were the same men that did not have a hesitation about pull the trigger, okay? They had done everything they had that they could do, and now they're on the way to Mexico to defend America from Francis Maximilian, who's going to invade it, because it's an opportune time. The president's dead, they're still in a war. France they're in a revolution, they need assets to go raid them. These men show up, and after all that killing, after all that war, the Spirit of God rolls through with them, and they delivered the news of freedom without firing a shot, without one bullet, right? So it's the culmination of the spirit of freedom. Everybody doesn't get it all at one time. It started April 16th in Washington, D.C., if you want to talk about when Lincoln signed that mass order freeing the people in the district, right? Ending June 14th, 1866, right? That's a lot. That's a spirit of freedom that's there, and sometimes it takes a minute for it to catch on. Some people it might not catch on to, but the one thing that it does is it brings all those freedom celebrations collectively together, right?
Hmm.
And the one thing, because like Black people in America have been separated and broken apart. So it's the Freedom Days. There's a different Freedom Day in Maryland, then there was in Mississippi, then there was in Louisiana, one in Florida, one in South
Hmm.
Carolina. But Juneteenth is an opportunity for us all to collectively celebrate the end of chattel slavery in America, right? So that's the purpose behind the Juneteenth, right? We don't take away from anything. We just that's the one unifying voice, one concept that we can get behind and say, hey, there you go.
So I would say let's close this out with where we are in this country at this moment in time. You're giving the history of Juneteenth and how it really, I like the idea of the spirit of freedom that carried over a couple of years until everybody came to this point. When we start talking about even critical race theory at this point and what should be taught in schools and how we should teach American history, how does this celebration play into the bigger picture of American history and how it should be taught and how we should teach our children right now about why it's important?
Juneteenthers, the Juneteenth mentality is not soft. Let me explain that again. The Juneteenth mentality is not soft. The Juneteenth mentality, you come to the table with your chest out, not your hand out. Too many times we come to the table with our hand out. We got the Juneteenth mentality in Texas. Right after that, in Houston, a group of men pulled together their money and resources to buy a park called Emancipation Park for them to celebrate their freedom. Okay, in Oklahoma, had the right to buy land and some other things that weren't allowed in the states, right? And they pulled their resources together. They had large families and they grew crops and they worked together to sell them together. And they didn't look to see what somebody could give them or what they could get. They looked to see where they could come from, because the true blessings they know and the true profit they know where it's going to come from. Not so that some other man say, I gave you this and I made you this, but that God said, I gave it to you and I made it to you. So to understand our history is to understand our future, to learn from what was taking place. Do all those Black Wall Streets, just not the Black Wall Street, but all those
Right.
Black Wall Streets throughout the country is where we start at. To understand, we raise the Juneteenth flag on the first Monday of every month. Want to know why? Because that's to emphasize the legislative and the economic importance of Juneteenth, right? It's also right about the time they started rebuilding Black Wall Street after they burnt it down, right? Which is a whole nother story, right? And it was almost
Right.
rebuilt completely by Christmas. Okay, so there's the economic part, there's an educational part to it. So critical race theory is just another piece of smoke screen. I want to make one quick example. If you go to school and they talk about who invented the telephone, right? Then be complete
Right.
and thorough in your research, right? Then you understand that Thomas Edison bought the patent from a guy named Granville T. Woods, who was using on the trains so the trains could tell where each other were at. Granville T. Woods sold it to him so that he could pursue his Granville T. Woods career as being an inventor. Thomas Edison got it and was working on the telephone with Watson, but he didn't draw the patent for it. He hired another guy by the name of Lewis Latimer to draw the patent for him, right? That guy, Lewis Latimer, also drew the patent and for the light bulb, was the only Black member of the Edison Society. If you want to, now that's where that comes in, because everybody says he was the only Black member of the Edison Society. That's how he's recognized. So it's not a matter of talking about critical race. It's talking about the truth, right? You know, we
Right.
got
Right.
shoes on right now that were made by a Black guy in Canada, made in Hans Messenger, right? He made it, you
Right.
know. The train wouldn't be nowhere without Elijah McCoy. No industrial revolution. He created the lubricating system. So if you have to just look at those challenges like that. If they say you have a problem, I was in Texas and I had the kids print out all the legislation that was against them. They came in with 4 boxes of
Wow.
legislation that was there. So it's not a matter of looking at it, complaining and shaking your fist and getting upset. It's a matter of like saying, okay, let's aggressively attack this, But
Right.
Tulsa was not burned down out of spite.
Mm-hmm.
It was burned down in retaliation. It was not even
Right.
retaliation. Yeah, you do not back down or back away, and you just assertively take on whatever is coming your way, right? So
Okay.
that's the major thing about the Juneteenth mentality. Do the best you can, what you got. We got a couple sayings I'll end with, right? One of our things is, when you know better, you do better. Thank you, Dr.
Mm-hmm.
Turnip, and the Juneteenth 101 podcast, and all things Juneteenth, right? So you look at that and think about exercising your freedom, which is liberty.
All right, great. Thank you so much for spending this time with me this morning. And I know that that you have a lot on your plate this week, but we are asking that people across this country come together in the spirit of freedom and the spirit of coalition building. And everyone have a safe and wonderful Juneteenth celebration.